I can't add any more stuff to my calendar. I've got enough going on.
When I told Linda, I said, you know, it's lovely coming here and taking, but if I don't give, that's not who I am. I need to be giving something.
And she said she doesn't quilt. I said,
you don't have to, you tie a knot, you tie your shoelaces.
Yeah, that's what I told her.
That was one of the two hardest things I did as a kid, was learn to tie my shoelaces and take a pill. Because taking a pill, you have to, you know, swallow that.
No, you put water in your mouth and then you put the pill in and then you swallow.
Oh yeah, but I thought I showed. Who knows what kids think?
Huh.
I didn't have that problem growing up, but now that I'm living by myself, I'm going, I don't want to choke on a pill.
Right, that's,
You don't want your obituary.
She died choking on a pill.
yeah.
How embarrassing, yeah.
For Nick, Grandpa and Grandma, they were in the pharmaceutical business. Whether the little bowl with the mallet that you crush pills with. Well, when Nick had to take his pills, and he had quite a few, I would crush them, add a little bit of water, suck them up with a thing, and then put it in his feeding tube and feed him that way. That way, yeah. So that, because they were afraid of him choking on the pills, they said, have you ever crushed pills? I said, oh yeah, I even have a crusher at home. So, yeah.
He's thinking.
He's thinking, go ahead, keep thinking.
Well, I was just trying to remember. I was somewhere. Where was I? And somebody
I
was
thought
telling
we were
me.
at permissible and
Yeah,
beneficial.
yeah.
The line.
No,
Well, I'm
something.
right up on it, and you're like, it's not beneficial to go any farther. No,
Yeah.
Terrible joke.
Exactly. No, I saw Linda with her yarn. I was talking to somebody and they had just received a donation of a ton of yarn. It wasn't here. I don't know.
Thank God.
I'm trying to remember the context. No, but it was something ridiculous, like 12,000. Oh, it was at Rosevilla. Wait, you were telling me.
They made over $4,200.
Holy.
Oh my gosh. Oh, did you go to Darlene's service?
Ricky did. I didn't know. We didn't know.
Did you? Yeah. Oh, good.
When was her service? I didn't know anything about
It
it.
was at Rosevilla on Saturday.
That they announced it last Sunday, didn't you?
Well, see, I'm in the back
In the back,
sometimes.
yeah.
I don't hear it all the
Well,
time.
there's a way to fix
If
that.
it's not in the
kids
bulletin,
put it
I
together,
don't
yeah.
get the information.
Do they have a
Way to
bulletin
do
and
that.
stuff, or
Or
no?
go
They
online.
do a bulletin for her?
I do. I have one at home.
Oh, okay.
Yes, there was.
All right, we can start. Super Bowl Sunday.
Go Seahawks.
Yeah, well, I was telling you that this is a clue of how much I pay attention to the NFL.
And the Olympics are going on. You got a choice there.
Yeah, exactly. We
They are
watched.
fun to watch, aren't
Oh,
they?
yeah.
We watched a little bit last
I'm
night.
flipping through the channels.
Did you hear that Lindsey Vonn crashed?
No,
Yeah, she's out.
I watched the thing that she did her trial, and then they said they were gonna do it on Sunday, so.
She crashed.
She was injured, wasn't she?
Oh, my God.
She tore her ACL.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
2 weeks. Well, she had already torn her ACL, but she still competed in the Olympics.
Right, but
And
now
she
she's.
crashed, and now it sounds like
Now
it's.
she's out.
Now she's out.
Now she's out.
What is she, 39?
Yeah, she's
41? 41.
She's young, however old she is. Yeah. Anyways,
Well, she'll become a very good commentator.
there you go. There you go. For the next
It's
several
kind of fun to
Olympics.
see Shaun White. He's all grown up and got a haircut finally.
Doesn't look like a hippie anymore.
Doesn't look like a hippie anymore. Has a intelligence to talk about what's going on.
Well, hippies aren't all that.
And I used to be a hippie.
What does that word mean to you?
Permissible.
Well,
Permissible.
that's a P.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a D, but I figured there was no such word as did.
It's to do something and not get in trouble.
Had to be a P.
It means it's okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a.
And then what does that word mean to you? Beneficial.
That
Positive.
Good for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Positive. It's helps you. So last week we left off at the end of chapter. What is this? Chapter 10. And I said that I wanted to spend a little bit of time with this. what I'm going to do today is we're going to spend a little bit of time here. We're going to briefly dip our toes into chapter 11, but I really want to get to chapter 12 because we've got 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are really the kind of, 12, 13, 14, 15 are really kind of the meat of the theological part of 1 Corinthians. And so I actually want to spend the rest of our time today in 12 and 13, and then next week we can do 14 and 15, and then we'll wrap up 1 Corinthians. Also, the next chapter, chapter 11, is kind of more of the same, Paul giving practical advice. And so I'll give you a little bit of stuff, but this is kind of an important metric, didactic, I don't know how you want to call this, in understanding kind of how Paul approaches everything to a certain extent. And this has always been fascinating to me, this end of chapter 10, because it's kind of a little glimpse into how Paul thinks. And essentially what he's doing is he's kind of summarizing the last, 4 to 5 chapters or so. And if you remember, the things that were, Paul was addressing are conflicts and questions within the community in Corinth around things like, sexual immorality, around, partaking in the Lord's Supper, around food sacrificed to idols, around marriage, around all of these different pieces. And so the end of chapter 10 here is a way in which he kind of essentially says, here's a metric, here's a rubric, here's a way of looking at things on the meta scale, on the big scale. In a way of saying to this community, like, listen, I'm not going to be able to address every single issue that arises. Let's talk about how we might, and again, the communal we here, how we, the Church of Corinth, might handle these things. And so, I can't remember if I read, I'll just read the paragraph. Starting at verse 23 in chapter 10. All things are permitted, but not all things are beneficial. I think I did read this. All things are permitted, but not all things build up. Do not seek your own advantage, but that of the other. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience, for the earth and its fullness are the Lord's. I did read this. I'll just read one more verse. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it out of consideration for the one who informed you for the sake of conscience. So, Paul throws out a kind of a specific example, which is you go to somebody's house and they offer you food, they offer you meat, and you don't know whether or not it's been sacrificed to an idol. So what do? This is kind of, Paul saying, let's talk about a case study, let's talk about a practical application here. He's saying, essentially, you just eat it, right? Whatever. And I love his justification, which is all things are from God's creation, right? This is, or as Jesus said, it's not what goes in the mouth that defiles, it's what comes out of it. But then he's saying, if they tell you that it's food that's sacrificed to an idol, then don't eat it. But what his reasoning is don't eat it because they went to the lengths to tell you, right? They were informing you, so respect the fact that they're letting you know because they've understood that might be a theological issue for you, so don't do it.
Question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the only people who would have sacrificed meat be the priests?
No.
Okay.
In a Hebrew setting, in a Judean setting, theoretically, the priests and or the Levites, that's how they sustained themselves, was with food given to the temple. But this is a very different context. This is in a Roman context wherein you would have feast days. And so the whole meal might be consecrated to Zeus or Apollo or Diana or whatever, right? And so, you bring home leftovers and feed them to your friends, right? And like this is kind of the issue here is it's an issue of things being almost the same but not quite, in these cultural differences. Where in Hebrew society that might have been a taboo insofar as that the only people that were supposed to eat food that was sacrificed on the altar were the priests and the Levites, okay? That would be a very different concept in this Roman concept of a feast day, whatever. But also, it's an issue of it's being sacrificed to Zeus, not to God, right? That would be the other kind of theological sticking point. But this, for me, is such a great kind of encapsulation of how the lens we ought to use when reading any of Paul's kind of cultural commentary. And the thing and I use this actually in confirmation. This is a great way to have teenagers think about rights and responsibilities as your amygdala starts to develop, or whatever, your forebrain evolves. Is this concept of what's permissible versus what's beneficial? Is we often confuse the two, right? Well, I'm allowed to do this, right? My parents said I'm allowed to do this, and it's like, okay, is that the way that we ought to navigate the world? Only the things that we're not going to get punished for doing, right? Everything that else is good, versus the things that are actually beneficial. A way to think about this, of course, for a lot of us is diet, right? Like I'm an adult, I can eat whatever the heck I want, but it's going to have consequences for my health, right? Which I had a doctor's appointment a month and a half ago or something like that. I'm getting to that age where I had to call and schedule for a colonoscopy.
Oh, they're not bad.
Yeah, I know. But it's more the idea of I'm now officially middle aged. Right. I'm at that age. But
that's beneficial to you.
Yeah, it's beneficial. I know. But I really like my doctor because we were talking about, okay, here's where your numbers are at in this, and here's where they're at in this, and I'm not worried about this, and don't worry about that. But I do have hereditary high blood pressure. It runs my family. So I'm on a low dosage of lisinopril for the first time. Now I'm really middle-aged.
Not till you get your Social Security card.
But it was an interesting conversation because, one of the ways that I've always related to doctors, especially when I was younger, is like the doctor is the law. Whatever they tell you, you have to follow. And he was like, well, here's the deal. Your blood pressure is a little bit high. We can just let it go for another year, or we can do this. And it's like, it's kind of up to you. And it's really fascinating because it's ultimately, this kind of like, yeah, we can just let it go for another year, right? But maybe it might behoove you to, I'm sure he's used to arguing with, grown men, not necessarily adults. Anyways.
Since you do a lot of cooking, you can control your salt.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's never really been an issue. Len has a very sensitive palate when it comes to sodium, so.
Yeah, good.
It's not diet, it's genes, unfortunately. I can cut salt out to my heart's content, but at literally every member of my dad has two sisters, both of them have high blood pressure. Both of my dad's parents had high blood pressure, so I'm
doomed.
In the world of things to inherit from your alleles,
Scandinavian blood.
there are many worse things. I can deal with high blood pressure. But just to say that, like, this is essentially, again, what Paul is, Paul's like, I just got done, with 6 chapters of lecturing you guys on behaviors within your community. Can we just, acknowledge that this is maybe a good way to approach stuff? By and large, I'm not going to be able to write you letters all the time to address every little issue that is going on within your community. So, maybe think about this when we're going forward. Okay. And it's fun because this is, for me, it has been very helpful in just kind of how I navigate the world in general, in thinking in those terms. So, okay. Turn to chapter 11. And again, we're gonna dip our toes in here because this is one of those where we could get really bogged down. But I kind of want to give you cliff notes. So let's talk about head coverings real quick. Let me ask you a question, which might tangent us, but that's okay. How many of you remember there being a day and age when women wore hats? Yeah, okay. I'm a little disappointed Susan Russell isn't here because she continues that trend, that tradition.
Yeah.
I'm not shaming her for not being here. I'm just saying she would have been a great case study. Yeah. Why?
Was it respectful?
It was respectful. Yeah. I don't know if anybody would have articulated 1 Corinthians 11, or I think it's like 2 Timothy. I can't remember where the other instance of the head covering comes up. I think there is one in Timothy. Anyways, but yeah, it's something that has made its way to our culture. But here's the thing: are guys supposed to wear hats in church?
No.
The opposite, right? You're not allowed to wear hats. Paula.
Guys are not supposed to wear hats indoors.
Period. Yes. Yeah.
That's right.
There was a funeral we had a few weeks ago, and there was a gentleman that was wearing a hat in the narthex, and I wouldn't bat an eye at it. It was a very political hat, and it's kind of like, I'm not going to be your parent. I'm not going to call you out on this, but I'm like, that might be permissible, but is it beneficial? Anyways, it's kind of like, okay, I guess that if that's who you want to be, that's who you're going to be. So where this comes from, or, the scriptural reference is in no small part to 1 Corinthians 11. I'm not going to read this whole paragraph. You can read it if you want. But here's what it comes down to. Here's the one thing you need to know, is that slaves were forced to cut their hair. Okay? Both men and women in Roman and Greek society, first thing that was done to them was they had their heads we didn't have big razors or trimmers, but their hair was shorn as a sign of their servitude. Okay? So Paul talks about there is no longer, Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free. And we know that within these faith communities, especially the church in Corinth, there would have been both, wealthy and poor people, both, merchants and slaves. When households converted, the whole household would convert to Christianity, including the servants in the household. Well, shockingly, one of the issues that arises is there's different lengths of hair in the community. Okay, and Paul zeroes in on women here. I had my Pauline professor at Luther was a guy that was more. He knew Pauline stuff very well, but his major area of study was actually he was a classicist. But he also did a ton of study into Greek culture around the 3rd century BC. He knew much. And one of the things that he said is that not only was it an issue because slaves would have their hair shorn, but actually hair length and hairstyle were indications of societal standing. Okay, and so what you would get often, and it hasn't changed all that much. I mean, what do we pay attention to on at the Oscars or the Grammys? Is the women walking down the red carpet and what's their dress look like and who did their hair and et cetera, et cetera. It's still, and it's not just women, it's guys too, thankfully. But in this world, it was an issue, and so you can imagine the conflicts that might create, especially knowing that one of the other issues that has arisen is that because these communities of faith, at least in the 1st century and early 2nd century, were rather gender equal when it came to leadership. You have now issues of people claiming, positions in hierarchy based on their social hierarchy, right? Their social standing. And so, what Paul is essentially saying here is, when we come before God, none of that matters. It's him essentially repeating himself and saying there is no Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free, in the eyes of God. So, you know what? It might be permissible, but is it beneficial? So, again, this is a very kind of Pauline way of thinking. Is the kind of hammer, nail, square block, square hole is, let's just cover your heads. That's going to be an issue. Kurt.
So my understanding, and that's interesting, I had not heard that perspective before, but I also understood, and I've heard various people teach this verse, but also that a good number, a sects of temple prostitutes would also shave their heads. So that was also the other issue, was when he goes, it might as well be shaved. Basically, they might be casting aspersions, even though you were exercising your freedom in Christ or just having a bald head.
It's social judgment.
Confuse you with someone who's offering services after service.
Yeah, and I'm not super educated on. I should read because it would be interesting, but I'm not super educated on the culture and the context of temple prostitution. But I wonder if that there wasn't an analog to servitude.
Right,
at least
probably, now that you mentioned, it's probably some overlap with
slavery in general.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that helps complete the picture.
Yeah. Well, it leads me down a rabbit hole because I'm curious how many of the temple prostitutes were there willingly, and how many were,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to survive.
Sex trafficking has always been a thing, not just in the modern era. But yeah, it's essentially leads to the same idea, is that, you know, in this context, before Christ, under God, none of that applies.
Well,
And
the
go-
other
go on.
possibility, and this is just a conjecture on my part, is that for cleanliness, for the woman who is a prostitute, it would be easier to cleanse
sure.
herself if she didn't have to worry about her hair.
Yeah. There's kind of always practical considerations too. Yeah. And then just skipping ahead, it's a similar thing with the Lord's Supper. Is that so? You know, communion for us is a very ritualistic thing that we do in the middle of our service, and you get a little wafer and a cup of wine. You know, obviously practices vary depending on tradition. You know, you might get a piece. You get a piece of bread if you're gluten free. You get a little wafer. But you know, practices vary. In Catholicism, you do get a wafer, not the wine. In different traditions, you might get a meal. In the first century, in the communities that were instituting the Lord's Supper, it was a meal. Okay, so how that functioned was there were two parts to the Sunday service, to the Sunday worship time. There would be a general gathering time that would lead up to lunch, and that general gathering time was mainly scriptural study, wherein whoever wanted to show up could show up, and there would be somebody or somebodies who were leading the community in a study of Scripture. And of course, Scripture at that point would have been the Hebrew Bible, plus, you know, maybe Pauline letters that were being circulated, plus, you know, proto-gospels that had existed. And then at some point in the service, that general period ends, and everybody who's not baptized leaves, and then only the baptized participate in the meal. And the thing is, the meal much more closely resembled an actual meal. It wasn't so ritualistic in that, you know, you had the silver chalice and, you know, gluten-free wafers and all that. It literally was a meal because, and we know this because what would happen is after that meal was done, they would then go take food to everyone that was associated with the community, especially widows, orphans, shut-ins, etc. You know, so the idea is that this wasn't exclusive, but only those who had been baptized participated in the ritualistic aspect of it. Just, you know, eating to their heart's content. And what Paul's getting at here is Paul is also kind of creating this concept, which becomes, you know, which evolves over time into what we have now in terms of the Eucharist. But he's saying, like, well, what we're doing here is we're actually remembering, we're celebrating what happened at the Last Supper, okay? And so Paul pulls in these words, and by the way, this is when on Sunday mornings, when I get up there, this is literally part of the service. We call it the words of institution, right? So I read, it's become a little bit more evolved than that, but here, I'll just read verses 23 to 26 and see if this sounds familiar for you. For I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, in the night when he was betrayed, took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, broke it and said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." The same way he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." It's literally the words of institution. I explained before, I do a little variance on it in that I add the word promise, the covenant. It has actually to do with when I was doing my worship studies, I was also doing music for the University of Minnesota campus ministry, and the campus pastor there would always add promise to covenant, because for her it was very important that these young, 20, 21-year-old, 22-year-olds understood that covenant wasn't necessarily about a contract, that it was about, this is the promise that God makes to you in the bread and wine. So that stuck with me, and it's hard for me. I can't do the words of institution without the word promise anymore. At least not without reading it, anyways. But that's effectively what Paul's saying here, is he's dealing with the same kind of practical issues in the communal setting as he's dealing with outside. And he's just saying, again, what's permissible, what's beneficial. Let's understand that when we gather around this table, it isn't just Friday night at the Golden Corral. This is something that has meaning and ritual and significance to it. So let's treat it in such a way. And again, I have to say that Paul uses a tool that he uses quite frequently, which is the tool of hyperbole. As far as that, he's trying to communicate to these people, like, this isn't just like general advice. Like like this has consequences to it as well too. And so he talks about, partaking of the supper in an unworthy way is condemning yourself. Now, does this mean that if you approach the altar with an unpenitent heart that you're going to hell? No. And to be fair, this is something that has had consequences within the Lutheran community for a long time, and I remember this quite well because I was, my congregation when I was, in my single digits was having that conversation around, is it okay for children to partake in the Lord's Supper? Do we need to have a first communion? Do we wait for the age of understanding, that whole 9 yards? And my congregation decided to commune children, which is obviously something that we now carry. Here, it's something that was a broader conversation that was happening within the ELC at the time. And there's other stuff in there as well too, insofar as that, this is one of the ways in which we distinguish ourselves from Catholicism, that we don't do First Communion, it's not one of our sacraments, but there's always overlap. So it's a conversation that continues to evolve around what is the best way to do this, even up to and including, do we vet people before they come to the Lord's table? And of course, the argument for that, which you'll often hear, and our LCMS colleagues will articulate this, is that, well, you need to understand what you're doing. And that's kind of in some ways echoing what Paul's saying, which is, well, if you participate in this unworthily, or if you're doing this for the wrong reasons, we don't want that. But here's the flip side of this, and this is where I tend to err, is I err on the side of, but it's not about me. It's not about me, right? In a Lutheran understanding of the sacraments are not what we do, it's what God does. So who am I to gatekeep as to whether or not anybody understands what they're actually receiving when they receive the bread and the wine, right? There's some Sundays I don't understand it, right? But I still receive it, trusting that God's grace is working in through and above, right? In through and under the bread and the wine, conveying the promise, conveying whatever I need. And there are some Sundays where it transcends understanding. There's what's her name? There's a great author who kind of came into Christianity through the back door, and essentially, I think she went to an Episcopalian church, something like that, and had no idea what she was doing. She was a single mother, dealing with a lot of things that single mothers deal with in terms of finances, and just was stressed beyond all belief. Comes in, walks into church on Sunday morning, sits down, and it's just like, what the heck am I doing here? They're saying a bunch of stuff I don't understand. Some dude stood up and blah 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 blah, and she participated in communion and had a spiritual revelation, and just like, who am I to say what's going on?
So we do the communal consent.
Yeah, right. That's the other. Yeah, how.
And somebody who might not be repentant still needs the community and the communion.
Yeah. Well, man, it leads you into another. What is the human capacity for repentance? We like to believe that we can turn our heart a full 180, but the ego, the id, always worm their way in there, right? Wherein, is my repentance solely so I can mitigate the consequences of my behavior? Anyway, there's also a further conversation we have around, critiquing that concept of, do I fully understand, am I fully repentant in that moment? And of course, Catholicism, I don't know my point that you can, but of course Catholicism, tries to answer that by saying that you go to confession before receiving communion, which I understand, right? That makes sense. If you're trying to get guaranteed contrition, well, do the thing, right? Confess your sin, then sit at the table. But we have reasons why. Yeah, 5 Hail Marys, 10 Our Fathers. Yeah. But obviously we don't do that. So. For good reasons. For our reasons. Okay, skip to chapter 12. Here's the fun stuff. I made it. It's 10:03, 10:01. And this is hopefully the part of a part of 1 Corinthians that is familiar to all y'all. Concerning spiritual gifts. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be ignorant. You know that when you were Gentiles, you were enticed and led astray to idols that could not speak.
Therefore, I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God ever says, 'Let Jesus be cursed.' And no one can say Jesus is Lord, except by the Holy Spirit. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit." I'm going to read up through verse 11, pause and keep going. "And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by the one Spirit. To another the working of powerful deeds. To another prophecy. To another the discernment of spirits. To another various kinds of tongues. To another the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually, just as the Spirit chooses." This is another passage that you can draw a line between Christian denominations on their interpretation of this passage. And of course, probably the one that comes to mind for those of you that have had a Pentecostal experience is speaking in tongues, right? And we've talked about this before. I will say, as very cerebral Lutherans, it's a hard thing for us to understand, and we often, and by we, I'm talking about the big we. We often look at those kinds of ecstatic experiences of the Spirit as being phony, contrived, etc. I don't know. It's not part of my tradition. I had never experienced it. Of course, one of the things that I always want to be careful of is invalidating others. I don't want to yuck somebody else's yum. I don't want to invalidate somebody else's experience of the Holy Spirit. I've never participated in that tradition. This passage is one source of kind of justification for that idea of that ecstatic experience of saying things that are not understood, that aren't in the lingua franca of the community. One of the things that was always pointed out to me, I did have one of my professors had experience in Pentecostal communities. He pointed out that, well, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that valid speaking in tongues always is paired with a valid interpretation, meaning that you can't just have somebody up there speaking in tongues. You need to have somebody that can interpret it. And if there isn't somebody that can interpret it, then it's kind of useless to the community. So he was saying what you'll often see, and Kurt, if you've had that experience, is that you'll see often two people stand up. One person who's giving the prophecy, and the other person who's saying this is what it means.
Growing up in that, the bigger issue is, especially within Pentecostalism, is that not so much the gift of speaking tongues, but they will add to the Bible and say, if you do not speak in tongues,
Sure.
then you are not saved.
Sure.
And there's a lot of pressure on people to sort of, rather than you get into that very regularly, and some, especially the evangelists will go, well, you're not saved, you haven't received the sealing of the Spirit, and then they differentiate between the sealing of the Spirit and the receipt of the Spirit, and it's like, you cannot.
Where are you getting that from?
Right, yeah, exactly. But they will take it that far, and it's absolutely ridiculous and extra biblical.
Yes.
And so you have your more conservative ones, and then you got these people out here, as they call them, you're dangled over you got the swimming pool of hell in your boxer shorts or something. That's how everybody used to say it. He grew up, holiness. But that is,
Holiness, yeah.
Majoring on the gifts in such a way, it really is in some ways a great hindrance to love. And as I was raised with quiet Baptist friends who did their quiet time of the day and absolutely believed in cessationism, so
Sure.
I was just like, what is the outworking? What is the fruit of the Spirit? Does speaking in tongues
What's the gift?
keep you from cussing out somebody in traffic? Not so much.
That's a whole path to go down. You got
That's
it right.
chapter 13, I think.
That'll be my excuse the next time I start something. Well, I was just speaking in tongues. Well, I've explained the part of my French before. Yes? Yeah, right. Well, again, so where that phrase originates from is in Victorian England, because you've got the interaction between due to conflict over centuries, you've got cultural interaction between France and the UK. Is that in Victorian England it became very haute couture. It became a very popular thing to sprinkle phrases of French into your everyday language as a way of saying, "Oh, I'm educated, I'm cultured," and so they would often say, "Oh, pardon my French," after they'd say a phrase. Well, of course, the lower classes would ape that, and that they'd say something very crude, and they'd say, "Pardon my French," and that's how that's. I love that is the cultural understanding that survived the test of time. I'm like, yay, not that I'm a classical, I am, but yay for the lower classes.
How do the French feel about that?
Well, they don't, right? Because number one, in France there is literally a governmental agency whose responsibility is to maintain the purity of the language, right? And so the idea of Brits speaking French is, like a monkey doing calculus. It's like, I'm being a little bit snarky here, but well, I mean, whatever. Also, Hélène rolls her eyes because we often don't realize how many French words are part of the English lexicon now. It's just, flies over our head. Like, how many of you are going to have hors d'oeuvres?
Or spell it.
Yeah, right. H apostrophe O R S G O E D R E S. Or petite fours, jeez. Or the one that drives me nuts is lingerie. I don't think I need to explain what lingerie is here, but it's not. It's lingerie is the French word. It does not mean in French what it means in English. She's always confused when she goes to Victoria's Secret. Lingerie, whatever. So that's an answer to your question. So gifts of the Spirit. So here's the thing that and again, I'm not necessarily going to articulate the Lutheran understanding. I'm not that. My ego isn't that big. But I will say that where my brain often goes with it, and where what I've studied in the past is specifically with the example of tongues, is that's a callback directly to Pentecost, right? And the big thing about Pentecost, of course, is that it's the diversity of languages. So the people, the apostles who are gathered in the room, start speaking, but they're speaking in the language of the people that are in the crowd around them. So they're not speaking incomprehensible things. They're actually just speaking languages that are not their own, which is it's actually a really powerful idea. It's the idea that the Holy Spirit empowers you to communicate outside of your cultural sphere, right? So I'm learning French, right? That's the gift of the Spirit. In a lot of ways, is empowering me to communicate outside my community.
So going back to Kurt's comment, you had to have two people, one interpreter or one speaking.
Well, it's my comment that
So the question I have is, so does the person speaking it know what he's saying?
You're you're pulling back the curtain.
I am.
And this is tough, right? And again, I don't want to diminish. I don't want to judge something that I don't understand.
Right.
Okay. That's the scientific side of my brain is like, do they just know each other really well?
Or they're just
Have they agreed upon it beforehand? Like, again, this is the cynical side. Is this something they talked about beforehand?
Yeah, but you're just empowering someone, whether or not it's true.
And again, it might have that value to that community in that context, but like Kurt was saying, then it becomes a different thing, wherein if you don't speak in tongues, you're less than, right? And that's especially where you start to
I mean, to go a little.
that's like if
straight,
you don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Right. Well, to be a little straight on this, I had in high school, I walked out of a class because I just basically thought the instructor was a philosophy class. And I just couldn't take it anymore. After a while, I said, this is ridiculous. And he came, why'd you do this? Well, for one, you're talking about Aristotle. How long ago was that?
Yeah.
Oh, a long time. So you're telling me that my interpretation of what he was trying to say, as passed on from Greek to Arab to English, is better than, is not valid, but that is better. I said, the problem is, no one can interpret. Aristotle did not tell anybody but his people around him, and he didn't write it down. So how do you know I'm not right and you're wrong? And he stopped at that point. I said, yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's great, but there's timeout, there's a limitation.
Yeah. You were that student.
I was that student.
I mean, but this is kind of the problem of everything, isn't it? I mean, because I was talking about Heraclitus some months ago, and none of his writings survived. So we only understand Heraclitus through the lens of his successors like Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, who were influenced by Heraclitus, and so we're trying to piece together what he believed and what he understood.
Also never wrote anything down.
Right, who else never, and so, yeah, essentially what we have is we have a snowball, right? We have the evolution of thought as traced through human history, which started with these ideas that can be traced back to somebody like Aristotle. But,
And if we didn't have the Arabs who actually did the work of translating it, we would have nothing.
yeah,
Well, it's also, if you started talking to Andy passed it on to the next person, and it finally gets to me, it's probably not gonna be the same as what came out of your mouth.
True.
Yes.
But at
Well,
least you
it's a
can
game-
come back to Andy and
it's
ask
the
what
game
he
of
thinks.
telephone, right?
Yeah.
For this entire passage, this is I think it's verse 6. I just looked at it and I forgot already. This is the phrase that I think is probably the most important in contextualizing what Paul's saying. Is that he places the emphasis that all of the gifts of the Spirit are for the common good. For the common good. And by card, folks. Thank you. So if it's something that is for your own edification, or it's a gatekeeping thing to get you in the in crowd, is it for the common good? And of course, common good isn't just the community of believers. It's this is good. Is this good for everybody? Right? We can talk about the various gifts that Paul highlights here. The gift of wisdom, the gift of knowledge, the gift of prophecy, of powerful deeds, discernment of spirits. Are these things beneficial? To go back to Paul's rubric of permissible and beneficial, are they beneficial for the community? And that isn't just a way of kind of addressing the issues here. It's also, I think, a very important piece of what Paul is trying to communicate to this community of believers who are seeking to understand their own identity and who they're becoming as Christians, etc., etc., etc. Is that at its heart, and this is what I talked about last week, is that we're called who is supremely interested in the well-being of creation, right? Of everybody. So if you have a gift, and it is uniquely beneficial to you insofar as that you are gaining power, influence, standing, or wealth out of it, maybe that's not actually a spiritual gift after all. Maybe, or the way you're using it isn't a spiritual gift. It's kind of that understanding that Paul is navigating around. Okay, I'm going to scroll ahead to verses 12 through. I'm going to read the rest of the chapter because Paul now rolls in that introduction. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and those members of the body that we think less honorable we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work powerful deeds? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. I love this. Is if you can't, you have to understand Paul's sarcasm a little bit here to appreciate what he's doing. Well, it's not really sarcasm. I guess it's not sarcasm per se. Okay, sorry, I'm putting the cart before the horse. What do you hear Paul saying about, in his metaphor of one body, many gifts? What's the picture that he's painting of?
I've seen, heard that passage reference to the multitude of faith traditions.
Sure.
One God, anyway.
Yeah, you could definitely bring this forward into a conversation around, not necessarily universalism, but, the value of different faith traditions beyond Christianity. I absolutely, yeah. Within the Christian community, Kurt.
Well, I guess this is exactly what it is concerning spiritual gifts. The point being that in the body, and this is, I'll give you the Pentecostal expression of this. If you don't have discerning spirits, then obviously if somebody gives an interpretation, then that person goes, well, this is valid.
Yeah.
All these things have to be working at this. And I've seen people get really out of whack where they just go on one thing.
Sure.
Not that I'm saying that. I'm just saying if you're giving that. So all of these things have to be functional, just as all members of your body have to be functional. And then you have pastors, prophets, teachers, sort of overarching leadership that sort of does this thing. But the thing is, bottom line, love is the over. When we get to 13, the rest of this stuff does not matter if there's not love operating. So I'm not sure why you're getting hung up in all these little hierarchies and expressions one way or the other if there's no love functioning. And if basically if there's no blood in the body, then who cares?
Who cares? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of what he gets to.
And I love too, is that, so we've got here Paul talking about diversity within the body, the necessity for a variety of gifts and skills. And I love kind of the idea that, well, you have to have all the skills working together, otherwise you're not going to function well. Which anybody in the medical field can explain to you the importance of the different organs and the different ways in which your body works together. We've got those organs that we weren't sure about, like the gallbladder and the appendix, where body can still function without them, but we've always kind of been curious as to were they actually just an evolutionary dead end, or was their purpose? Apparently now, at least with the appendix, they found it does something. It's like a bacterial reservoir, I think, like a filter. Yeah. But people still survive without appendix. Sorry, I'm going way too far down that metaphor, but you get the general gist of it. And to be fair, this is a metaphor that Lutherans particularly not over and against other faith traditions, but this has always been something that we value greatly. This is a passage that I remember getting hit over the head with multiple times, both as a young person but in seminary, is this idea, and it's particularly manifested in how we understand the role of clergy within the bigger picture, is that don't get too full of yourself. You have a specific responsibility in the bigger picture of things, but you know what? Other people do too. Luther takes 1 Corinthians 11 here and runs with it when he starts talking about vocation. This is, by the way, one of my favorite, Luther stuff I can take and leave depending on, because he's got like 57 volumes, so there's a lot there. And they're all this thick. But his conversation, his discussion of the concept of vocation is absolutely wonderful, especially in terms of kind of how we think about our Christian identity in a modern, in a modern understanding. Is we tend to, you'll hear a lot of sermons, well, you're a Christian first and you're everything else. And Luther's like, no, that's not the way that it works. We're God's children first, and certainly your faith or religious experience should be kind of a lens through which you understand your identity, but similar to the parts of Christ, the bodies of the members of the body of Christ. All these things need to work together. Your vocation as parent, as student, as teacher, as brother, as sister, as mother, all of these things are part of who you are as a child of God. Let's not start ranking those. There was one more thing. Oh, Paul's sarcasm. I don't know if you picked up on it, but Paul says, well, here's the thing. Some people we give a lot of, I'm paraphrasing, we give a lot of acknowledgement to. We lift some people up, but actually they're the least. and the people that get the least acknowledgement, actually they're the greatest. And it's like, aha, have we seen that? Like, some people need to be patted on the back, right? Some people need to be told they're doing wonderfully. Some people, don't. He's like, and then, again, he's just throwing a wrench into it, because then he gets to the end, he's talking about, well, and then all these parts work together, blah, 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 but then the ones that are, the greatest are actually the least, etc. Which I heard somebody give, it might have been one of my seminary lectures, was talking about how pastors always want to think they're the best thing in the room, and really we're just the ones that need the most accolades. We need somebody to tell us we're the best most.
I will tell a little bit of my history. I had a choice at one point in my life when I was dating David, and I had previously dated a guy in high school. David was a pilot. The high school guy was a plumber. Did I make the right choice?
That's a good question. Plumbers make a lot of money.
Well, no, but he could also fix things.
Right, yeah, there's a practical application of the skill set. Yeah. Well, it's funny, I was thinking about this, treat lawyers and judges with kid gloves from time to time to maintain fragile egos.
Or else quit.
Yeah. No, it's the same.
Let me explain that to you.
Pastors the same way. Well, to be fair, oh my gosh, my brief stint as an engineer, I was a lowly process engineer, and we had to go to this mandatory training. And God, the corporate speak. I don't know if any of you have gotten the opportunity, but there's a I don't remember what it's about, but it's like a skills training thing called 6 Sigma. Has anybody heard of this before? And at least when I had to take the 6 Sigma training, but it was like they used the language of martial arts, so you'd be like a 6 Sigma brown belt. And it was just, and I just remember, I'm like, is this an episode of The Office that I just walked into? I'm sitting in this room, and there's some guy up there who's like, he's blah blah blah. Now let me tell you about my training. I'm a black belt, and he literally had a black belt. He wasn't wearing it, but he's like, here's my 6 Sigma black belt. And I'm like, one of the sorry. I'm thinking of Wizard of Oz references. One of the little people called Munchkins. One of the Munchkins is going to come walking out here, because I'm not in Kansas anymore. Okay. Let's read through 1 Corinthians 13. We'll go for another 10 minutes, and then we can roll this into next week's conversation. This is 1 Corinthians 13, you've heard probably a million times at weddings. And that's okay. Cliches are cliches for a reason. And in this case, I think this is one of the most valuable passages in Scripture. And again, I overuse this concept, but I also think it's one of the lenses that you have to read Paul's words through. Chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. For now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love remain, these three, and the greatest of these is love. How many of you have memorized this chapter? Yeah. Oh, hold on, pause.
So this week we focused on our light and how we can let our light shine. So, September, do you want to do yours first?
So my lantern says, hugs make me feel loved, and
What are 2 ways that you can let your light shine?
to give hugs to other people in my family.
All right. Ellis, what are 2 ways to make your light shine?
Having 130 baby elephants and stars.
That's really great.
So I'm going to ask you one more time. Ellis, what are things that you do nice for others?
I help others.
Thank you, Alice.
Okay,
Thank you, September. Those are awesome, man.
we're going to put them up by the...
Cool.
And September has something for you.
Oh, boy. Oh, what do you call this, September? Fortune teller.
Here, and tell them what you put on there.
Yep.
So I put you, God, Adam, and Jesus.
So you have to remind me how I do this. Matthew.
N-A-T-T-H-E-W.
2.
1, 2, and number.
6. Oh, and there's a fortune underneath it. Be kind to 6 people. No, sorry. I was being snarky, September.
I'm snarky. I was being a pastor and I was trying to negotiate with you.
She thought you meant number 5 here,
Okay.
so she's telling you what number 5 is.
What's number 5?
Do a good deed for 5.
So now I'm up to 11. Thank you very much, September. You know what I'm going to do with this? I'm going to put this on my desk in my office, and anytime somebody comes and complains to me, I'm going to have them do this. This is very great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. 10:29. Okay, let's go for another 6 minutes or so. Okay, so we're pretty much all familiar with this text. Yeah, we've heard it at weddings and otherwise. What's the general vibe that you get here? What do you hear Paul saying?
Love is everything.
Love is everything. Yeah. Yeah. What does that mean in the concrete world for you?
Compassion.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Paul says love is patient, love is kind. Yeah. Has this ever been an answer to a conundrum or a challenge to something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just asking what would love do in any situation. It's
Yeah.
not easy.
Yeah. Isn't that an interesting kind of framework to navigate the world?
I always thought that the idea of we see through the glass darkly
Mm-hmm.
is really significant because it helps remind us we don't know it all.
Yeah.
This is
And
one of my favorite parts of it, and I actually prefer the translation "now we see as in a mirror dimly." That's my partial to that one because so keep in mind, right, that like our modern silver mirrors that do a perfect reflection are very unique in the history. You know, what were mirrors 2,000 years ago?
Polished copper.
Yeah, polished metal. If you were lucky, if you could afford that thing, welcome, Anthony. Water, you know, a basin of water will give you a reflection. Insofar as that, like, a mirror was not a perfect image, it was a reflection, but it was still something that distorted the picture a little bit. And again, this is, I could spend hours talking about this concept of, I was just thinking about this the other day, how often we see our own faces, right? And how that is a very modern reality, right? We have so many mirrors in our house, right? We have mirrors that aren't even used as mirrors. They're there to amplify light in the room. There's a mirror on one wall that reflects the sunlight that comes in and makes the room brighter. But I shouldn't even say the ancient world. In a lot of history, mirrors were things that were relegated to the wealthy and the privileged. So, insofar as that you didn't see your face, unless maybe you looked into a running stream, which again is a distorted image. So, just the way in which you understand yourself was different, right? The way in which you understand who you are, in which you imagine yourself to be, was completely different. And now we are confronted daily by images of ourselves, distorted or otherwise, right? They say the camera adds 10 pounds, right? How many, and the fact that our young people, not just young people, human beings are obsessed with their self-image, right? Whether they fit the ideal of beauty, right? That whether they match up to the movie stars that they see. And people feel compelled to take pictures of themselves and post them so other people can see them, and so that other people can tell them how beautiful they look to get positive reinforcement to help build that self-image. Absolutely terrifying. Understanding that 500 years ago, you could see others, but seeing yourself was rare. Anyways, so the idea of Paul saying now we see as in a mirror dimly, for me has always carried this weight to it of, it's falling up on, I used to be a child, now I'm an adult, is this idea of even now we will never completely understand. And I've often, 10:33, okay. There was a Greek poet by the name of Sappho. Anybody familiar with Sappho? Yeah. Sappho is fascinating because Sappho was a woman, which in that classical world would have been rare in terms of somebody who was a writer, author, poet, and to have the work propagated and recognized within the broader sphere. But Sappho has a particular piece of poetry, and I looked it up once, in which she uses this image of, she talks about love being able to look into the eyes of another person. And there's a cultural thing to this, because so we talked about one of the exports of Corinth was black something pottery. You remember we were talking about that? Okay. So just like there are trends within art in the modern world, any art history majors in here? Okay, good. We talk about different eras and impressionist versus whatever. I can throw words up there that I don't understand. But there are different eras of art. There were tropes within art in the ancient world as well too. And one of the tropes, they would do a lot of pottery for weddings, for big events and funerals. And so when somebody dies, especially somebody of means and wealth, they would be buried with pottery, and on those pots would often be images that depicted events within their lifetime. But one of the things that held true, or one of the tropes within art, was that the way that they would portray married couples is they would always make the man taller and the woman shorter so that the man was gazing down upon his wife. So Sappho has this poetry saying that love is being able to look in each other's eyes. It's equality. And I love pulling this into Paul, and it always makes me wonder if Paul had read Sappho, because Paul is saying, in fact, now we look as in a mirror dimly, but one day we shall see face to face, right? That there is an equality in love. There's an equalization, equity in love. That you can't have love and have the teeter-totter, unbalanced. And so I've often read that into 1 Corinthians 13, in that love, as Paul is articulating here, in response to his talking about the many gifts of the Spirit, there are many gifts, but one member, he finishes by talking about the equality of those gifts and how they need to function together. And then he goes in and says, but then the lens through which we view everything is the lens of love, right? If you don't have love, none of those things matter. And what is love? Well, love, at least in part, is understanding the value of the other, right? It's understanding that the other has as much value. So it's a great kind of concept.
Yeah, I often think of a great painting of face of a woman. And when it captures the being of the person as opposed to the dress or their doing or their wealth or whatever.
Yeah.
But the expression, Mona Lisa and on and on. It captures their spiritual being, which is non-material. And
Good art does.
I sense Paul is saying, capturing that spiritual being, not the material doing and wealth and whatever.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about all the ways in which we kind of navigate the world in terms of social hierarchy and standing, and we can talk about our body image, how we see ourselves in the perspective of, in the eyes of others, and how that affects our emotional, and like this idea of are we valued, even well, in the ways in which we rank skill sets, especially in terms of pay scale. There are so many metrics by which we can judge ourselves in the eyes of our society and fail, right? It's so easy to devalue ourselves in the world as we experience it. And I think that's why it's ultimately so important that the kind of one of the core concepts present within our faith is the idea that there, again, Paul says it in so many different ways. There is no Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free. There are many gifts, but one, that all needed part of one body. It's only through love that any of these things has meaning. That we keep coming back to this idea of that doesn't matter. None of that matters in the light of the divine things. All right, I went longer than I said I was going to. So next week we're going to wrap up 1 Corinthians. We did back into 13, but I really want to wrap up with 14 and 15. 16 is the closing of the letter. And even next week, I actually want to spend most of my time with 15. Because Paul gets back into tongues again, and we talk about tongues today. But I want to talk about the resurrection of Christ and where the resurrection